Major developments emerging out of the crisis in Sri Lanka. Several politicians have reportedly fled the Colombo port, and that is speculated to also be the serving President GOTABAYA Rajapaksa. Protesters have breached the presidential palace, as a result of which Mr. Rajapaksa has had to flee. He has allegedly fled his residence, though there is much intrigue over where exactly. Protesters have also reached the fort near GALLE, where in fact in the vicinity there's a cricket match underway between Australia and Sri Lanka. 33 people have been injured in nationwide protests and 2 people have been reported critical. Police have fired tear gas shells at the protesters, but by and large these protests have been peaceful, some say with the complicity of the police as well. Priests as well as nuns have formed human chains in different parts of the country where these protests are still underway. A police officer has also been known to in fact join the ranks of protesters, and former cricketer and in fact the man of the series in the World Cup in 1996, Sanat Jayasuriya, has also joined the protesters but called on them to protest peacefully, and the protesters have also managed to in fact storm the Central Secretariat in Sri Lanka. Let me go across to Padma Rao, a journalist joining us for more updates on this. Ms. Rao, what's your reading of the situation on the ground? Is it endgame for the entire Rajapaksa family that had in fact had a stranglehold around the state of affairs in Sri Lanka? Ma'am, I think you've muted yourself. If you could just unmute. Yeah.
Sorry, yeah, my bad. So, Siddharth, I think it was already the end game, or the beginning of the end game, when the entire family that was in power, various ministers, including the Prime Minister, that is the current President's brother, resigned. This was only about a month and a half ago when I was out there reporting for you. And and now, you know, it has come to a situation where we don't really know where Gotabaya Rajapaksa is. But remember, these rumors swirling around that he boarded a yacht and he left and all that. First of all, it's not a yacht. It's significantly, it's a naval vessel. It is an advanced offshore patrol vessel. It's called the Gajabahu, and this is, this indicates that there is that the armed forces are still obviously going to protect, the president and his family, or the rulers, whoever are in power. So this also implies that if there is growing, if the violence gets out of control, and if there is any damage to, public property, or if there are people killed, and as you already read out, more than 30 people have been injured and 2 of them are grievously injured, then I'm afraid that you might see a larger role for the armed forces on the streets of Sri Lanka. And that is something that really, these protesters who are protesting peacefully up to now, that's the last thing they need or want. But unfortunately, it's up to them really now to keep these protests under control. And fine, they've got Gotabaya Rajapaksa out of the presidential palace. Whether he's actually going to lay down that office or not remains to be seen. Whether he's actually fled overseas or not remains to be seen. If you remember the last time this happened, it was, when there were unconfirmed visuals of a helicopter taking off from the Prime Minister's residence, and eventually the Prime Minister happened to be, under the protection of the armed forces in Trincomalee in the northeast. Yes. So we really don't know where Mr. Gotabaya Rajapaksa is right now. Right now, the situation is grave. It's of growing concern, and there is, I unfortunately envisage a larger role for the armed forces, perhaps in this situation, and that is not something that the protesters want. But what do they want? That is the next question. If that would be your next question, I'll answer it.
It would be. In fact, you read me right there, Padma Rao, because we also had the opportunity to speak to Kushal Pereira, a journalist from Sri Lanka, and like you, he did not rule out the possibility of some kind of a military takeover or a larger role for the army, because his perspective was, and I'm sure you'd agree, that the protesters on the ground are not necessarily happy with Mr. Ranil Wickremesinghe himself. It's not as if they're protesting in favor of him remaining in power. So there's a lot of ambiguity about who exactly they want to take over after the Rajapaksas.
Absolutely, two issues. I completely agree with him because you see, Mr. Ranil Wickremesinghe really has only one seat in Parliament. He was not elected to this position. He was named as Prime Minister, in fact, by the very president who has just fled his residence, Mr. Gotabaya Rajapaksa. So he is not exactly the person they see as the savior, of Sri Lanka's fortunes. However, he is the person, happens to be the politician who is the senior most politician in power right now. He is the one with massive experience in politics. And, you need sometimes a steady hand to steer a ship through such stormy seas. Now, whether his will be that steady hand or not, we don't know. But the point is, who else, Siddharth? The thing is that the opposition, which is a very strong opposition and has the support of the people, has been asked to join, at least on two occasions, to join a kind of interim administration. What this country needs right now, Siddharth, is a body, a functioning body of individuals who will continue negotiations with the IMF to get them out of this big economic crisis. Now, if every, prime minister or president or other politician is, if the people want them out, then who is going to be that body of officials who negotiates with the IMF? Then your entire negotiation process is only going to get delayed further and further and further, and your problems are going to mount. I mean, they're already humongous in Sri Lanka. So, so the situation right now is the way it looks. I agree. I think there's going to be a greater army presence. The people want snap polls. Maybe there will be, some sort of an interim administration hurriedly put in place. But remember, the opposition was offered that role. It refused it. It turned it down because it said Gotabaya must go. Sure. Now it's time to walk the talk. If he's gone, then will Mr. Sajid Premadasa take over? Will Dr. Harsha De Silva take over? I mean, they're eminently suitable. The Sajid Premadasa is a very popular leader. Harsha is a very, very famous economist, and he's a good economist. So are these people now going to steer Sri Lanka out of this problem, or are they going to say no again? Because that is the problem. There is a crisis of leadership as well as an economic crisis in Sri Lanka. And I'm afraid there will be it'll only grow worse if the violence on the ground also continues to grow.
And Ms. Rao, as we speak, there's a piece of breaking news coming in, and that is that the current Prime Minister of Sri Lanka, Ranil Wickremesinghe, has called for an emergency meeting with the participation of party leaders across party lines to discuss the current situation and find an immediate solution. Ms. Rao, coming back to you now, that's very vague as well as ambiguous. And in fact, it was also reported that Ranil Wickremesinghe might want to convene a session of the Sri Lankan Parliament, but his own legitimacy in the eyes of many, ma'am, is in question.
Yes, but how is that going to give him legitimacy remains to be seen, because right now there is, all we've been seeing, Siddharth, since April, May, since I've been reporting out of there, all we have been seeing is meeting after meeting, discussion after discussion, political one-upmanship after political one-upmanship in Parliament. We're not seeing any kind of consensus. Now, whether Mr. Ranil Wickremesinghe suddenly with the departure of Gotabaya Rajapaksa is going to achieve that kind of consensus, between bitterly warring politicians, just because Gotabaya is not physically there, I doubt that very much. I really doubt that very much. And I'm afraid that the people who are protesting have to come out with a clearer plan. What exactly do you want? If you want Gotabaya to go, he's gone. If you want a new government, if you want new elections, don't hold any more meetings. Go for snap elections. Elect a new government, but elect one of whom you're confident will steer you through this crisis. Unfortunately, Siddharth, there is no such person there right now.
Absolutely. And Padma Rao,